Hi, everybody. Welcome once again to Story Hour, the last Story Hour for 2025, it turns out. I am your host, Daniel Marcus. My extraordinary co-host is Laura Blackwell, and it is Wednesday evening in the California Bay Area, and we are back again bringing you what we like to believe is the best in spoken word speculative fiction you can get pretty much anywhere. We have work from all across the huge tent of speculative fiction, horror, fantasy, hard SF, your favorite punk dialect, space opera, slipstream, weird, dark, weird, and more. We also have all kinds of authors. We have new writers for whom the ink on their first contract is barely dry, as well as seasoned pros and everybody in between. So I started this thing over 5 years ago in the early days of the pandemic, and things were very weird out there. We were kind of in what we thought might be the soft apocalypse we had been writing and reading about for so many years. I mean, not like now. And I wanted to create a place where my friends and I could get together and share our work and just have a little community and kind of shelter in place against the weirdness. And so very shortly after I kicked it off, I asked my friend and colleague Laura Blackwell to join me as co-host. And we've been at it together ever since. And 5 years later, we are still at it. Things are still weird and trending weirder, but Story Hour is still here. And I think we need stories more than ever, and we kind of need each other more than ever. So we're not going anywhere. Story Hour relies on a very ancient tradition, and that tradition is folks sitting around the fire telling lies. So every week we continue this practice. We have two writers, about 30 minutes each, narrating their own work. I want to thank the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America for their generous grant, which helps us to keep the lights on and keep these virtual rooms open. So thank you, SIFLA. And with that, we're really excited to welcome our two authors this evening, Tim Melody Pratt and Heather Shaw. And we are going to start the evening with Heather. So let's get to it. Heather is a writer, editor, sewist, bookkeeper, and Lindy Hopper living in Berkeley, California, my town as well, with her husband and 17-year-old son, River. She's had short fiction published in Strange Horizons, The Year's Best Fantasy, Escape Pod, Podcastle, and other fine places. She's been the fiction editor at the erotica zine Fishnet, the speculative fiction zine Flytrap, and the pro SF zine Persistent Visions. As a family project during lockdown, Heather, Tim, and their son River designed, created, and successfully kickstarted a tabletop card game called CyberWreck. And Heather mostly posts on Blue Sky as Sundu and on Facebook as H.L. Shaw. Heather, welcome back. Take it away.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. Yes, well, tonight I will be reading a story called Skipping Christmas, and this is a collab by Heather Shaw and Tim Pratt. And I'm going to jump right in. The flight was dead. To begin with, Leo Altman was seated in Suite 2K in the first class section, his usual preference since the first row was too close to the bathroom, and he had almost the whole cabin to himself. There were 14 seats up here in first, and as far as Leo could tell, there were only two other passengers, neither nearby. There might be teeming hordes in coach, but those poor souls boarded through a separate entrance, so he'd never know. He doubted even cattle class was crowded, though. He'd done this same flight a dozen times, the first few in his early 30s when he could only afford business class, and it was never a crowded route. Not many people chose to take the nonstop flight from Los Angeles, California to Sydney, Australia on the evening of December 24th. If they did, they crossed the international date line on the way, landing in Sydney on the morning of December 26th, skipping Christmas Day entirely. Leo hadn't experienced Christmas in over a decade. Oh, Christmas still happened. His nibbling Ash always sent a cheerful text about it, for one thing. But it happened without Leo, taking place on a page of the calendar that he didn't inhabit. The plane taxied and lifted off, and Leo ignored the chatter from the cockpit and settled in. A flight attendant brought merely adequate champagne, but soon returned with a glass of butterscotch. She didn't even wish him happy holidays. Leo was content to spend the next 13 hours basking in serenity, another annual landmine successfully avoided. His first class suite didn't have a door or even a privacy curtain like some other airlines provided, but given his scheduling needs, it was the best he could do. Usually it was good enough, but not this time. This time, little stranger slipped into his suite and sat down on the little jump seat across from his recliner, meant for guests to visit and chat. The interloper was short and slender, dressed in white silk pajamas, with an eruption of pale yellow hair on top of their head, but the sides shaved. Their eyes were bright, their smile wide. The overall impression was of an anthropomorphic candle. Leo couldn't guess their gender, but then his nibbling was non-binary, so he was used to that sort of thing. Or more strangely, their age. Young? Old? Neither? Hello, Leo, they said in a voice that trilled. I'm sorry for the lack of warning. I usually work with a team, and ideally we like to send a mutual acquaintance ahead to make introductions, but we're terribly busy lately, so you'll have to make do with me alone. An intrusion. In another 5 years, if things continued as planned, Leo would be able to stop flying commercial entirely, and by the time he was 50, he hoped to have his own private plane. Please return to your seat, Leo said. Don't make me call the flight attendant. I hate fuss. But Leo, we have so much to talk about. Listen, if you're a protester or something, that's all down to the management team at the factory. I certainly never told anyone to do those things. Oh, I don't protest. I reclaim. They held out one slim-fingered hand. I'm pleased to meet you, Leo. I'm the ghost of Christmas past. Oh God, was this some sort of cosplay? I don't care about Christmas past, present, or future. It's a day that's never done me any good, and it's done me plenty of harm. I'm calling. The stranger grasped his hand. Their touch was icy and hot all at once, like a healing balm. Rise and take a walk with me. Leo tried and failed to pull his hand away. What, down the aisle? Eventually, but first, they said, holding on tight. The plane banked, but the two of them didn't bank with it. Instead, they rose out of their seats and passed through the hull of the plane and out into the freezing torrent of night air. Leo screamed as they began to fall and screamed harder when he realized that they were falling upward into a bank of clouds. The mists parted and Leo lurched against a familiar wall. He was in the home of his younger sister Pamela and her family, standing in her spacious living room in front of a towering blue spruce bedecked in too many lights and ornaments. But there was something wrong. Granted, he hadn't been in her house for a dozen years, not since that last disastrous attempt at family Christmas, but that was it. He hadn't been here in a dozen years, but the house was the same as he remembered from that visit, with the old blue wallpaper and the brown carpet, both of which she'd replaced, white paint and restored hardwood, respectively. Updates he'd only seen online in photos and in the pictorial Christmas cards she still sent, their one non-practical form of communication these days. It's even the same tree, he murmured, and the self-proclaimed spirit was at his side, nodding. We have returned to your past, though we exist as ghosts here. Do you remember this day? The last holiday you spent with the people who love you and whom you once loved. Leo walked away from the impossible creature toward the kitchen and saw what he dreaded. His own self, a dozen years younger, sitting at the kitchen island with a glass of untouched wine. Pamela leaned against the counter on the other side, as far away as she could be from him without actually leaving the room. Neither took notice of the current Leo's arrival. Pamela spoke through gritted teeth. That's not the point. You could have just told me you wanted to come tonight, Leo. You didn't have to threaten us. She dropped her voice an octave. Shouldn't the person who plays for your family's fancy private school get invited to Christmas dinner? What's wrong with you? I asked you to join us for years and you always said no, so eventually I stopped. And then I got asked into Marley Sims Academy and paid the tuition, and you still didn't invite me back. The bitterness in the younger Leo's voice was poisonous. The new Leo's guts twisted and he groaned. He didn't want to see this. He knew the argument spiraled from there into bitterness and shouting. Old wounds reopened and ended with Leo storming out and swearing he'd never darken their door again. Though, of course, he kept paying for Ash's school. It wasn't their fault, and he'd never intended to make a threat. He just wanted to spur Pamela into showing some gratitude for once. After that year, he'd started taking flights to skip Christmas entirely. That way, it didn't sting so much to never be invited, but it stung freshly now. Take me out of here, Leo said, turning to the spirit, who was looking at Ash's artwork pinned up on the fridge. The kid showed a vibrant eye, even back then. It's good for you to see this, the spirit said. Leo scowled. You said we're ghosts here? Gaze upon the actions of your past and consider the repercussions, the spirit blathered. We are as ghosts, Leo thought. Ghosts could do things, couldn't they? At least in some stories. Leo had never been good at waiting and watching. He believed in decisive, confident action. That was the key to success, and also possibly the key to some of his problems. But who could change their own nature? He was a person of action, so he acted. Leo walked up to his younger self, who was taking a drink of wine and preparing a blistering verbal attack that would effectively end his already tenuous relationship with his sister, reducing their contact to emails about tuition statements and stiff invitations to Ash's performances and graduations, though he only managed to attend the latter. Leo walked into his former self, and it was like stepping into a freezing shower, a bracing shock to the system. What are you? The spirit said, then their voice abruptly cut off. Leo's vision briefly doubled and then cleared, and he tasted wine in his mouth. Old Leo was in younger Leo's body. This ghost could possess people, or himself anyway. Leo opened his new old mouth, and all decisiveness fled. How often had he imagined living in this moment over again? How often he considered calling Pam to try to make things right, only to be stopped by pride? Why should he be the one to apologize? But it wasn't pride, was it? It was fear. Fear that Pamela would never forgive him, not again, not after so many other squandered chances. Fear that he wouldn't deserve her forgiveness if she did. He slumped. I'm sorry, Pammy, you're right. I was feeling unappreciated and I acted like an ass. Pamela didn't unbristle. We never asked you to get our kid into that school, Leo. Ash was perfectly fine at the local elementary school. But then you showed him those brochures and told them about the art classes and the theater program and the music and got them all excited. But you never even mentioned the school to us. Ash came to us begging to go, and that was the first we heard about it. And then you come along and say, oh, I know some people, and I can pick up the tab. Do you have any idea how screwed up that is, Leo? You went around us about our own child. David can barely stand to speak to you anymore. But Ash was so excited, so we couldn't say no. And after all that, you want to be treated as some hero? Leo opened his mouth and closed it again. He felt his way forward carefully, a word at a time. I I see your point. I was just afraid that if I came to you first, you'd say no, the way you always did when I offered to help you out before with the house and grad school. Pamela sighed. We might have said yes for Ash. Turns out you'll do anything for your kids. But Leo, we've talked about this before. The only way you try to relate to us is with money. It's like you're trying to buy your way out of the hard parts of a relationship. Like if you pay enough, you'll never have to endure a meaningful conversation. And we are grateful that you're helping Ash, but you could have been close to Ash and close to us without making some big financial gesture. You could have just, Leo, you could have just said you were sorry about everything and meant it. I, the word wanted to stick in his throat. That word was weakness, wasn't it? I'm sorry. We'll see if you mean it, Pamela said, and then, I really hope you do. Before Leo could respond, a cold hand touched the nape of his neck, and he found himself torn out of his younger self. He staggered across the room, and the ghost of Christmas past seized him by the wrist again. Most unorthodox, the ghost murmured, but I suppose no one will ever know about it, and you do show a capacity for regret. Is this just an image, a simulation, or did we really go back? Leo clutched at the spirit. Did I change? We have more to see, the spirit said, and this time they dropped through the floor into the basement, where Ash and their father David were playing on a new video game system. And then deeper into the dirt and down and down and down, Leo shouting incoherently, even as soil filled his mouth. They landed in snow, out in front of Pamela's old house, the smaller one where she'd lived with David right after they got married, before Ash was born. And even a younger Leo stood on her front steps, wearing a scarf and a coat that was too thin, and he leaned on the buzzer until the door finally opened. Leo walked over the snow. He left no footprints, and mounted the steps to look over his younger self's shoulder. Pamela was so young. What was she, all of 23? Which meant that Leo was 25, one of the hustling years, which the all-nighter years, the coding until dawn years, a time of moves and maneuvers before he discovered that appearances mattered more than substance. Pamela glared at his old self. Fuck off, Leo. Her brother lifted a box wrapped not in Christmas paper, but in silver wrappings decorated with bells. You sent back your wedding gift. Seems like a weird oversight. You registered for it and everything. I sent it back because fuck off, Pamela said. You missed the rehearsal dinner because you were making some deal, and then you showed up late to the wedding and you weren't in any of the photos, and then you screwed a waiter at the reception and you didn't even give your toast. The ghostly Leo groaned, unheard by the younger siblings. That year he'd been, well, under a lot of stress, and also there'd been a certain amount of cocaine. This conversation went badly too, with the revelation that Pamela hadn't even wanted him at the wedding, that her parents had insisted that she ask him to give a toast, and that she'd been a fool to listen to them. Their relationship had thawed a little in the years later, but it never really healed. Can I change things, Spirit? Leo asked. It's never too late, not on this side of the grave, the Spirit said. Leo sighed. Not what I meant. He stepped into his younger self again and prepared for the disorientation this time. Newly embodied, he set down the box, which contained a Le Creuset enameled cast iron Dutch oven in deep blue, on the snowy steps. He opened his arms. I'm an idiot, Pam. I I was on a lot of drugs, to be totally honest, but I'm going to stop that shit. I mean it. He really had stopped too, a couple of years later, after getting a nosebleed during an important pitch. He wouldn't let his drug habit get in the way of his success. I'm a total mess and you suffered for it, and this time the words were a little easier to get out. I'm sorry. It's going to take a lot more than sorry, Leo, and we all know you're a cokehead. It's not like you're good at hiding it. This was news to old Leo, who winced in his young body. Then Pamela touched his arm. This really sucks, you know? We've never been close. Not the way I wanted. Not since when we were kids, when I got hurt. You just pulled away, turned inward, and wouldn't let me in. That's why I asked you to be an usher and give a toast at my wedding. I was hoping it could open a door for us. Leo blinked at her. Mom and Dad didn't make you include me? She snorted. Has anyone ever been able to make me do anything? Leo snorted back. She'd only said that about his parents to hurt him then. But he couldn't blame her. He'd said plenty of hurtful things too. Hadn't he called her a child bride at one point, and she was throwing her future away on a man she barely knew? She'd proven them wrong by parenting a child and getting a PhD. I want us to be close too, Leo said. I always have. I'm not good at this stuff, Pammy. It's easier to, oh God, was he having an insight into himself? It's easier to screw things up on purpose sometimes than to worry how I'm going to screw them up by accident. You need some therapy, big brother, Pamela said. Lots of therapy. Especially because, well, in about 7 months, you're going to be an uncle, and I can't have a total fuck up like you around my kid. Leo gaped. In reality, he'd found out about Pam's pregnancy from his mother, who assumed he'd already knew. He wasn't sure Pamela ever had actually told him directly about Ash before Ash was born. Pam, congratulations. That's wow. And yes, I'll The spirit yanked him out of his body again and into the snow, but the snow turned to clouds and they drifted like snowflakes themselves into the lawn of a narrow two-story home that Leo only saw anymore in his dreams. He moaned, "Stop, come on, I get it, okay?" He stood, brushing snow off his knees. "You're sort of a therapist, aren't you?" The spirit flickered like a flame. "If you'd gotten therapy," they said, "maybe you wouldn't have needed me. Come on." "I don't need to see this. You don't think I don't remember? But I can change it this time, can't I?" He got to his feet and raced for the front door, the spirit calling after him, but Leo refused to listen. He smashed his shoulder into the holly wreath on the front door of his childhood home, but passed through it as if it were smoke. He stumbled and looked up the stairs, the banister wrapped in green garlands, and there was Pamela, standing at the top, twirling an umbrella striped like a candy cane. He ran up, saying, "No, no, no," and reached for her, but she was smoke too. He could only interact with himself, it seemed. Leo tore past her down the hallway and found his room decorated with posters of heroic robots and bright galaxies and photos of the moon. There he was, 8 years old, sprawled on his bed, reading a comic book and not even thinking about his little sister, whom his parents had asked him to watch for 15 minutes while they went to the store for more wrapping paper. His little sister, who had just seen Mary Poppins and didn't see why she couldn't fly with an umbrella too. It was basically a parachute after all. And so she leapt from the top of the stairs and broke her left leg and sprained her right ankle and was lucky she didn't die. The family spent Christmas Eve and Christmas morning in the hospital that year. It was Leo's first bad Christmas. He hadn't believed Christmases could be bad before that. First and worst, the Christmas he was still trying to fly away from. Leo leapt into his child's self. It was harder than before, like struggling into a sweater that was too small, but he managed and rolled off the bed and scampered down the hall just in time to see little Pamela leap and to watch, horrified as she struck a step and sprawled and tumbled, limbs waving until she hit the floor. He hadn't seen her fall last time, only heard her screaming, and now that started up. And soon the door would open and his parents would be there and they would say, "Why weren't you watching your sister? We trusted you." "I'm sorry," he sobbed, kneeling. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." The spirit drew him out again, but more gently this time, and a moment later they were back in the airplane. Leo in his seat, the spirit across from him. Leo closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." "You were just a child," the spirit said. "You made a mistake. No one truly blamed you except yourself. Even your parents weren't angry, not after those first frightened moments. They felt guilty more than anything else." "Not as guilty as I did." Leo put his face in his hands. "After that, every time I looked at Pamela, every time I saw a garland or a Christmas tree, I felt so awful. And to see Pamela at Christmas, nothing worse." "New memories can be made," the spirit said. "Old ones can fade." They paused. "And you really should consider therapy." "But wait, I did change things, didn't I?" Leo perked up. "Not the accident, but later we went back in time and I made different choices." Leo had gotten good at reading people over his years in business, and even if the spirit wasn't a person, the look of pity on their face was clear enough. Leo's brief hope curdled like old eggnog. "We didn't really travel in time, did we?" "No. What we saw were visions. The past is my domain, and I do have some sway over time. I can stretch it and make a single night seem to last for days, for instance. But to go back a dozen years or more, no. There would be too many consequences for an act like that." "It's too late then," Leo slumped. "Even if I wanted to go to Pamela now, see her and Ash and David for Christmas, to say I'm sorry finally and mean it, I can't. By the time we land, even if I catch the next plane back, even with the time change working in my favor, I'd still land too late. So what was the point of all of this to make me feel bad and live with the consequences? To see the moments where I made bad choices and know I can't do anything about them?" The spirit gazed at Leo with a look of curiosity. Leo sighed. "I guess it's fair. My family's had to live with the consequences of my actions for years, and they don't get do-overs either. There's always next Christmas. And I can lay the groundwork, start reaching out, try to connect. And yes, I hear you all about the therapy." Leo's mind, so often engaged in stratagems for success in business, began to devise stratagems for familial success. I wish I could be there for Christmas. It's so much at the heart of all this damage. But there's always next year. Well, you've displayed an impressive amount of growth for one night. The spirits steepled their forefingers together and looked thoughtful. You know, as I said, I have some sway. I can't transport you back a dozen years, but the plane only took off a half an hour ago in real time, and it would be a shame to make your family wait a whole year. They reached out and touched Leo's wrist, and the two of them fell out of the plane again. This time, when they landed, they were in the boarding area by the gate at LAX, where younger Leo, younger by perhaps a whole hour, approaching first class entry line. There was a richness to the colors around him, a crispness to the air, a brightness to the sounds, that told Leo that this was different than the other trips to the past. He'd only visited those. He could go live in this one. Go on then, the spirit said. This sort of thing isn't strictly allowed, but I'm working alone tonight, so no one has to know. Leo grinned at the spirit and rushed across the terminal, running straight into himself from behind, stepping into a body that fit him as comfortably as his favorite shoes. He spun on his heel and marched away from the gate, back towards the exits, wheeling his bag along behind him. He glanced back once and thought he saw a flicker, like a candle flame, disappearing into the air. Leo pulled out his phone one-handed and told it to call Ash. When his nibbling answered, he said, "Hey, kid, can you put your mother on? I want to ask her something. And tell her something else." He grinned. "Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. And no, I didn't forget. Merry Christmas to you, too. Merry Christmas to us all." And that's the end. Thank you.
That was awesome.
Thank
Thank
you.
Love
you
that
so
one.
much.
It's a
Um, Heather Shaw, everybody. Oh man. Um, it's our custom here at Story Hour just to take a pause, take a breath between authors. Um, just to sort of let the story resonate a little bit before moving on to the next one. So we're going to do that, or I'm going to do that anyway. Y'all can do whatever you like for the next 15 seconds. Heather Shaw, folks. Our next author is Tim Melody Pratt. Melody is a Hugo Award-winning SF and fantasy author and editor, and has been a finalist for World Fantasy, Philip K. Dick, Sturgeon, Stoker, Mythopoeic, and Nebula Awards, among others. Pratt's short fiction and poetry have appeared in the Best American Short Stories, the Best American Erotica, the year's Best Fantasy and Horror, and the Mammoth Book of Best New Horror, Strange Horizons, Realms of Fantasy, Asimov's, Lady Churchill's, Rosebud Wristlet, Subterranean, and Clark's World, among many, many other places, and she is the author of over 30 novels. She publishes a new story every month at patreon.com/Tim Pratt and posts incessantly on Blue Sky under @timpratt.org. Melody, thank you for joining us once again, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for having us. This is always a blast. We love holiday traditions. Um, we love holiday stories. We've been writing them for Podcastle for about a dozen years. Skipping Christmas was a Podcastle story. I write one for my Patreon every year. Sometimes somebody else asks us to write one or asks me to write one. We do that too. Always more ideas for seasonal stories. Because we're sitting in the dark, what else is there to do? The sun goes down at 4:15 and it's 62 degrees in my house. What else am I going to do except make up stories about things? So I'm going to read a story that was on my Patreon maybe about 7 years ago, which I mostly picked initially to read because it was the right length and I hadn't read it here before. I didn't really remember very much of it, and when I was practicing it for time, I wept through the entire last 5 minutes, so I'm hoping that I get myself under control a little better this time. It's about parent feels. It has some kind of heavy stuff happening in it here and there. I should give a couple of content warning-y things. There is child endangerment, and there is a non-traumatic pet death, a natural pet death. Everything turns out fine, apart from the pet death. It is a holiday story. No children were actually harmed in the making of this story. So yeah, If those things are really tough for you, maybe step away and bask in the glory of Heather's non-traumatizing Christmas story. Okay. It says 12 Days at Christmas. Carl pulled the sheet of gingerbread people out of the oven and scooped them onto a metal rack to cool. His toddler Nicky babbled over and tugged on his apron, having once more defeated the baby gate meant to keep him away from the hot oven. Carl scooped him up and plopped him on the other side of the gate, then twisted some wire around the bars and the supposedly baby-proof latch. Nicky bawled, and Carl handed him an uniced gingerbread cookie, instantly silencing the cries. Nicky would doubtless gnaw on the cookie and then leave the disgusting, sodden, disintegrating remainder somewhere between the couch cushions was a favorite, but it would also keep him happily occupied long enough for Carl to finish baking the last batch and decorating the earlier ones. Carl had always loved Christmas, and having a kid to share the season with had increased his already considerable enthusiasm by exponential degrees. Nicky's newfound ability to walk and climb had exponentially increased the difficulty of holiday prep, though. Something small and brown flashed by the corner of Carl's eye, and he turned, frowning. They'd had a problem with mice a couple of years before, but he hadn't seen one in ages, not since they got their cat, Balthazar. Bringing home a kitten right before bringing home a baby had certainly made the house more lively, but it was cute watching Balthazar and Nicky grow up together. Before Carl could investigate the mystery flash, Nicky fell on his butt right outside the gate and began to sob and wave his arms around, the cookie nowhere in sight. Had he already hidden it somewhere as a gross treat for later? Carl sighed and got Nicky a sippy cup of milk, and the boy began to hone his engineering skills further by attempting to get the lid off so he could pour milk all over his own head. Later, Carl's wife Sandra brought him the uniced gingerbread man's severed head. I found the cat playing with this, she said. Weird, Carl said. Nicky is usually terrible at sharing. 2. I thought you were watering it. Sandra prodded their shedding, browning Christmas tree. Needles showered down onto the big boy bike they'd purchased for Nicky's 8th Christmas, and Carl brushed them off the seat. They'd hidden the bike under a tarp in the garage all month and brought it in for the late Christmas Eve staging, because Nicky still believed in Santa Claus, or at least let his parents believe he still did. The neglected tree made things a little macabre, though. Clearly mistakes were made, Carl said. At least the lights and ornaments are nice. This tree is like a corpse made up all pretty for the funeral. Sandra sounded more amused than annoyed. It's fine, it only has to make it through tomorrow. We can drag the coniferous carcass out to the curb on Boxing Day. Why is it called Boxing Day, anyway? I think it's Sugar Ray Robinson's birthday, Sandra deadpanned. They finished arranging things just so and went to bed. They were awakened not long after dawn by Nicky jumping on their bed and shouting, "Bike! I got a bike! Santa brought a bike!" They stumbled out for the morning festivities, all bathrobes and coffee and cameras, and both stared at the tree. It was as lush and green as if they'd cut it down the night before, when in fact it had been cut down on a Christmas tree farm in Oregon and shipped on a truck to California and purchased in Berkeley 3 weeks before and never subsequently watered even once. Wasn't that tree super dead last night? Sandra said. Maybe the light was just bad, Carl said. Sandra nodded. Uh-huh. There's no light more harsh, unforgiving, and unflattering than Christmas lights. Carl shrugged. Christmas miracle? The only real Christmas miracle is when you think the eggnog's gone and it turns out there's a cupful left. Then Nicky started trying to ride the bike in the living room, which was not the proper venue for such actions, and they were distracted from the impossible life flourishing in their midst. 3. When Nicky was 10, they spent Christmas in Tahoe with his Uncle Pete and Aunt Willa and multiple cousins. Nicky mostly ignored the extendeds and read in the little nook under the stairs, but he did join his cousins to build a snowman, snow being a novelty he'd only experienced a few times, hailing as he did from the terribly temperate climes of the Bay Area. They built your basic 3-globe snowman, stick arms, celery nose because they didn't have a carrot, smooth dark rocks for eyes, no top hat because why would anyone have a top hat? But they did steal Willa's good scarf and wrap that around its semblance of a neck. The result was lumpy, lopsided, and appeared mildly deranged, and the cousins, who hailed from frequently snowbound Idaho, all wandered off soon after they finished. Nicky stared at their creation for a long time, thinking about that Frosty the Snowman cartoon, wondering. There was a thing he could do sometimes. It didn't always work. In fact, maybe 364 out of 365 times it didn't work at all. But sometimes, in the week around Christmas especially, sometimes, he waved. The snowman waved back, but the motion was too vigorous, and its stick arm fell off. The snowman's lopsided face looked horrified and aghast. Nicky sighed and put the arm back on, and then went inside. 4. Nicky spent his 20th Christmas working at the little independent movie house in his college town. He played Sean Nelson's song, Sometimes You Have to Work on Christmas, about someone in the exact same situation about 15 times in a row, wondering if anyone would even come in at all. The only thing showing was a holiday movie starring a former football player turned professional wrestler turned action movie star turned comedy movie actor. The movie was terrible, but the star was likable, and Nicky did especially appreciate the scene where he ran shirtless through the snow being chased by angry reindeer, but nobody else seemed interested in watching today. Nicky wanted a drink, but getting drunk behind the counter at the indie movie house on Christmas was just a little bit too depressing. There was a life-size cardboard standee of the star across the lobby, quirked eyebrow, perfect grin, impressively shirtless but draped in a red and green scarf. People took selfies with the cutout sometimes. Nicky raised a cup of Mr. Pibb in its direction. Happy holidays, he said. The cardboard cutout winked at him. Nicky dropped his cup, then dropped to the floor himself, then hyperventilated, then put his head between his knees until he stopped hyperventilating. He eased himself up and peered over the top of the counter like a soldier peeking over the edge of a foxhole. The cutout didn't wink or move or anything, so Nicky eased up farther. Nothing like this had happened since he was a little kid, and he'd long ago convinced himself it was just an overactive imagination thing. Nicky couldn't do what he could do because people couldn't really do that. He'd just been studying too hard, he was depressed and hungover and lonely and at work on Christmas, and that was all. He was very careful not to make eye contact with the cutout again, though. 5. We're celebrating the return of the sun. Stephanie leaned up against Nicky by the bonfire. It's a sacred and ancient rite of celebration. The solstice isn't for another 2 weeks, Nicky pointed out. Yeah, but everyone is leaving to go home for the holidays before that, so this is solstice observed. There were people running around the yard tripping on mushrooms, and people stumbling around drinking wine, and people drifting around smoking weed. The big house behind them belonged to some anthropology professor who was traveling abroad and who'd put one of her grad students in charge of house sitting, and the grad student had put the house to use for this. Any excuse for a party is a good excuse. Nicky was deep in his wassail cups himself. Or was it only wassailing if you went drinking door to door? He was drinking cup to cup. Here's to Mithras, the unconquerable sun, and the return of the light and life and everything. Did you know? Did you know when I was little, I thought I could bring things to life on Christmas or around Christmas? Like in the Nutcracker, she said? Velveteen Rabbit, Toy Story? Not just toys. He poured some more wine into himself. Though I do remember some epic G.I. Joe battles, but also snowmen, cookies shaped like reindeer. I used to have to breathe on them, and then later I could just touch them, and eventually I could just look at them. Even last year I wasn't sleeping enough, and one night I thought a cardboard cutout of a movie star winked at me. That's wild. When I was little, I thought I could make the wind blow. I was terrified I'd cause a tornado and destroy the school. Kids believe all kinds of things. She snuggled closer. But being a grown-up is super way more fun. Would you like to go celebrate the return of the sun with all of our pants off? 6. This cat is not 30 years old, the vet said, because no house cat is 30 years old. The vet's name was Tasha, and she had curly black hair and was very short and curvy, and Nick was so in love with her that he kept finding excuses to bring Balthazar in, even though the cat didn't have anything wrong with him, apart from a tendency to vomit when he ate weird things, which he did at every opportunity. Nick and Dr. Tasha had a nice little rapport going until Nick mentioned that he and the cat were almost the same age, and then she started talking to him like he was a 4-year-old. Well, actually, there's a cat in Texas that lived to be 38. Nick was apologetic. I researched it. That's fine. This cat is not 30 years old. This cat is, I'd guess, 10 or 12. Nick shook his head. My parents got her right before I was born. We've had her ever since. I took her to live with me when I graduated college. Tasha shook her head. What actually happened was your cat died while you were in high school or college, and your parents bought a new cat that looked the same and didn't tell you because they love you very much. Tasha, you're calling my mom and dad liars? Did they tell you Santa Claus was real? Well, I mean, I hate to have to tell you this, but there is no Santa Claus, Tasha said. Also, your cat is not immortal. None of my cats, but none of my pets ever died. Not my hamster, not my guinea pig, not even my goldfish. He trailed off, pondering the implications. Wow, Tasha said, your parents must love you a lot. I am super lovable. Would you like to get coffee sometime and talk about how lovable I am? I don't usually date people as gullible as you are, but it could be refreshing, she said. 7. Their daughter Melanie was born a year after they got married, just as they'd planned. It's because I am a woman of science, Tasha said, and wise in the ways of animal husbandry and wifery. Melanie's birthday was in January, and so by their first Christmas, she was already walking, just, and babbling endlessly. Nick kept trying to get her to say Dada, but so far her only intelligent words were Mama and Nana. The latter meant banana, but also meant by synecdoche anything potentially edible. Nick and Melanie were decorating the tree, putting the delicate glass heirloom ornaments up high and the durable wood and plastic ones down low. Since Melanie had a tendency to snatch and taste anything she could reach, she was toddling around behind them, babbling quietly to herself and bashing the coffee table with a wooden spoon. Angel or star on top, Nick said. Nana, Melanie said distinctly, and Nick turned to see his daughter had climbed on top of the coffee table and was using her new height to reach for a low shelf covered in glass-framed photographs and glasses of mulled wine and a bowl of mixed nuts. Nick swooped over and grabbed his daughter, scooping her up and laughing. At first he thought her howling was outrage at having her destructive plans thwarted, but then Tasha said, "Oh no, look at her hand." And he saw her palm was streaked red and rashed and bumped over with hives. What happened? Tasha scooped up a handful of peanuts their daughter had grabbed and then dropped on the carpet, her eyes wide. She must be allergic. They soothed Melanie and spread cream on her hand, and Nick listened to her breathing intently, though Tasha said physical contact didn't usually affect that, even with severe peanut allergies. Nick and Tasha didn't like peanut butter, never had it in the house, so this was baby's first interaction with the legume, and Nick resolved it would be her last. He scanned labels and scoured the house of everything peanut related, even throwing out the bottle of peanut oil Tasha used for stir fries, though she said refined oil didn't usually contain allergens. Better safe, he muttered, and held his daughter close, breathing in her scent until she squirmed away and went to chase Balthazar. That night, putting Melanie to bed, Nick felt an old instinct and closed his eyes. He concentrated and reached for something inside himself. Melanie's favorite stuffed snow leopard toy purred and nuzzled her and kneaded at her chubby thigh, and she laughed until she fell asleep, hugging her toy close. Nick later decided he'd probably dreamed the thing about the snow leopard moving, but some compartment of his mind knew better. 8. When Melanie was 3, Nick's mom visited for Christmas. His dad had died earlier that year, and this was the family's first Christmas without him. Nick and Sandra were both crowded by the short days and the long dark. Melanie and Tasha were off at the park, and Nick and Sandra sat sipping coffee in his kitchen, their silence equal parts companionable and sad. Balthazar meowed and wound around their legs. The cat's still going strong, I see, Sandra said. The immortal miracle cat, apparently, Nick said, 35 years old, unless... Is this really the original Balthazar? He'd never asked before. That cat clawed my couch to ribbons when you were a kid, Sandra said. He once peed inside my good Kate Spade handbag. Do you really think I would have gotten an identical replacement for her? She sipped her coffee. You've always just had really good luck with pets, Nikki. Your guinea pigs and fish didn't die until you moved away from home. Look, he said. Or whatever. Pets, plants, they always thrived around you. Does she... Have you ever seen or noticed anything like that with her? They'd never even come close to discussing the subject before, and Nick felt the edge of a vast abyss creep closer. No, never. Nothing like that. Sandra nodded. Your grandmother could make a garden bloom in the middle of winter. Famous green thumb. Me, I can kill a cactus. Maybe it skips a generation. Nick smiled. Good thing Tasha didn't hear you say that. She'd tell you that's not how genes work. Some recessive traits might express themselves unpredictably, that's all. Oh, well, if it's science we're talking about now, sure. His mother opened her mouth, closed it, and then changed the subject to what they were making for Christmas dinner. 9. Melanie was playing Tinkerbell in the 5th grade performance of Peter and Wendy on the last day of school before winter break. Nick sat beside Tasha and held her hand and laughed as their daughter stomped and glared and stuck out her tongue at Wendy for stealing all of Peter's affection. Turned out 5th grade was the year when school plays actually became entertaining. These kids mostly remembered their lines. Some of them even had comic timing and a flair for the dramatic. Melanie nailed her big death scene, drinking the poisoned medicine to save Peter and collapsing with a chest-clutching twirl and grimace. Tasha gripped his hand hard, and he felt it too. Seeing their daughter even pretend to die was a surprise sledgehammer to the heart. In college, Nick had briefly been enamored with Stoic philosophy and for a few weeks had dutifully imagined terrible things happening to his loved ones, preparing himself for inevitable tragedy by inoculating himself emotionally beforehand. That approach was useless as a parent, though. His mind skittered away from thoughts of any harm coming to Melanie like roaches running from the light. He and Tasha joined in with the rest of the audience as Peter exhorted them to clap their hands to bring Tinker Bell back to life, and the fist of his heart unclenched when Melanie leapt, bright-eyed and smiling, back upright into life. 10. Melanie had successfully campaigned to go latchkey that fifth grade year, walking the half-mile home from school and instead of going to an after-school program. Nick had resisted the idea when Melanie pitched it over the summer, but Tasha had rolled her eyes. I was home every afternoon from age 7. Your parents were so overprotective, Nick. In practice, their daughter's newfound freedom wasn't too terrifying. Nick worked from home doing website and graphic design. 4 days out of 5, he was there when Melanie arrived and said hello and vanished into her room to text her friends and play video games. During winter break, she was home all day with him, and she was cheerful enough about occasionally breaking her preteen seclusion and making cookies, wrapping presents, and singing Christmas songs with him. It reminded him of those pre-kindergarten days when he'd stayed at home daddied for her, and they'd had adventures and played games and gotten on each other's nerves. Melanie was growing up strong and good, but sometimes he could hardly believe she was more than halfway to adulthood, and him halfway to an empty nest, assuming Melanie went away to college after high school. On the afternoon before Christmas Eve, he went out to do some last-minute shopping, and Melanie declined to join him, being involved in a complex multi-person chat with her best friends about matters of grave consequence. Nick told himself she'd be fine for a few hours alone. She knew the emergency protocol, she had a phone, she was a responsible kid. But he still fretted, so he cut his shopping short and came back early. Later, he would wonder if he'd had a premonition of disaster. Maybe, but in truth, he'd gotten just as worried on other occasions when everything was fine. This time, everything wasn't fine. He came in the front door and called to Melanie with no answer. There was something new in the living room, a wicker basket wrapped in red cellophane on the coffee table, a gift from a client. The cellophane was ripped off, treats, jars of jam, tins of candy spilling out, all very fancy and artisanal and minimally labeled. Melanie must have found it irresistible. She'd always had a weakness for treats. Balthazar was meowing somewhere deeper in the house, insistent, disconsolate. Something lay on the floor halfway to the door leading into the kitchen. Nick Benton picked it up. A chocolate-covered pretzel. Melanie loved those. This one had a bite taken out of it, revealing that it was not just chocolate-covered, but also stuffed with peanut butter. Nick bashed through the door and found Melanie sprawled face up on the kitchen floor, utterly still, eyes wide. Balthazar stalked around her, tail lashing. Melanie must have been trying to get to her auto-injector of epinephrine right there on the counter. There was another in her room, another at school, another in the car. But she hadn't reached it before her airway closed, and she ran out of breath and collapsed. Nick snatched up the auto-ejector and knelt beside his daughter, ignoring how glazed and dull her eyes were, how cold her leg felt when he jammed the injector into her thigh. He stared down at her unmoving body, trying not to think of how long ago she'd bitten the pretzel, how long ago she'd fallen, how long ago she'd... He gathered her body up into his arms, holding her tight, hugging her and rocking. How could he have thought Melanie was halfway to grown up when she was so small? She was still his baby. She was his life and his light. No, 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 he said, and again and again. All the light in the room seemed to dim as if he'd pulled it into himself. He closed his eyes, looking for that light in his own dark expanse. Something inside him stirred, and he found the light and gathered it. In the past, around this time of year, he sometimes sent out that light in tiny bursts, the flickering of a candle, the flash of a reflected sunbeam, a flare of warmth and light and life. Now he needed more. Something deep inside him strained and cracked and burst, and this time when he let his light shine out, he released the unconquerable sun. Melanie stirred in his arms. Nick opened his eyes, dizzy and lightheaded, and looked into her face and her staring and wondering eyes. Daddy, she said. Daddy, it was so dark. You're okay, he said, and then the shadows took him out of the light. 11. Nick slept 15 hours that night and woke up groggy on Christmas Eve to find his wife and daughter crying. He reassured them that he was okay, but Tasha said she knew that. He just freaked out about Melody's allergy attack and fainted. It was a very Nick thing to do. No, they were sad about something else. Balthazar had died quietly in the night, right beside Melanie's bed. If you believe Nick's mom, the cat was 42 years old that year. And even Tasha had to concede she'd been an exceedingly spry 20-something cat just the day before. Balthazar died quietly and without fuss, and now was a still dark bundle of impossibly soft fur. Nick wept. That cat was his oldest friend. But as his family stood together in the chill Christmas Eve backyard, taking turns with the shovel, he looked at his living, breathing daughter, acknowledged the existence of a mathematics of balance unknown to science, and he thought, worth it. 12. Melanie named her daughter Carla in honor of Nick's dad. Nick loved that kid so hard his heart wanted to burst. Having a child had been a huge and vital, informative, and foundational experience, but having a grandchild was like just the good parts version of parenthood, all the fun and none of the filth. When little Carly was 5, Nick and Tasha visited Melanie and her wife Lori for the holidays, their trunks stuffed with gifts. She gets this one now, Nick said, presenting Carly with a fancy advent calendar in the shape of a gingerbread house. You're more than 20 days behind, he said. You better open those doors and windows. Tasha and Melanie and Lori went into the kitchen to get drinks, but Nick stayed to watch his granddaughter enjoy the gift. Carly set the calendar on the coffee table and proceeded to open the doors in careful numerical order, drawing out candy, nothing even remotely nut-related, and little plastic toys, elves and snowmen and penguins for some reason. The last door she opened for the 21st had a little toy reindeer behind it, small enough to nestle in the palm of a hand. Look, Grampy, she said, it's Rudolph. The most famous flying reindeer, he said. Look at that nose. I can't make him fly, I don't think, Carly said, but sometimes. She tapped the reindeer on its little red nose, and the tiny figurine shook itself awake and began to prance around joyfully on the table, and Carly and Nicky both laughed and clapped their hands.
Ugh.
And I did not cry this time. I teared up a little bit, but I did not cry.
Oh man, thank you so much, Melody. That was lovely.
Well, thank you.
Quite a journey.
Well, I wrote that when in 2018, our child is now 18, just officially became an adult. So I wrote that when he was about halfway to grown, and somehow the time gets away from you. The years just keep unspooling.
That's for sure, man.
Yeah.
Goes quick.
Oh, well, thank you both so much.
Well, thanks.
This is kind of becoming a story hour tradition to have you folks here for the last show of the year. I hope we can continue it.
I'm game if you are.
Heather Shaw, Tim Melody Pratt, thanks. Um, thank you, Laura Blackwell, friend and colleague, co-host of Story Hour. Thank you all out there for coming back. We hope you have a great holiday. We're going to take 2 weeks off this time, and we'll be coming back on January 7th, starting the year with a great program, Nisi Shaw and Eileen Gunn. So we are really excited for that. Meanwhile, stay safe, stay warm. Hope you spend the holidays with people you love, surrounded with light, and we'll see you next year. Bye, everybody.
Good night. Happy holidays and Happy New Year soon.